man.
How's it going?
Oh, it's going fine. Just in my office where I spend every hour of the day.
I can relate.
Yeah, how are you?
Hanging in there. Um, yeah, it's been a busy week, but we're doing all right. Everybody's still safe and healthy, and it's been nice to have extra family time for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a whole different ball game for sure. Whole different ball game. Um well, I guess you caught some of the interview with Alec. I'm kind of through popular demand, people, I think everybody's stuck at home. So, I had a few people like, hey, can you do more photographer interviews? So I was like, yeah, great. I'm gonna call all my friends. So
It's a good
that's
starting
one
point
fun
for
thing
sure.
about doing it yourself. Hey, George is here. George Muncie. He's going to be next week's interview. That should be fun.
Very
Um,
cool.
yeah, it's so this is kind of a very low key, in the life of behind the scenes photographer chats. So thanks for being willing to spill your guts on here.
I mean, that's just any normal day, I guess, right?
Right. It just comes with the job at this point.
Hmm.
All right. So you want to just get into it?
Sure. Well,
Let's do it.
yeah, may as well. Just peel off the band-aid.
All right. So I guess I should say, like, for those of you that are joining, that Matt and I go a few years back because we started grad school together and clung to each other for dear life through grad school.
That's accurate. Yeah.
And so, there's something about being tried by fire together that kind of builds a kindredness for sure. And so, while, we could probably spend a lot of hours talking about specifically about your work, uh, a lot of hours. I think that this time is going to be better spent by kind of the things that I think a lot of, at least my students and like younger photographers and even seasoned veterans have just about life, as being a photographer, as being a practitioner. Um, I find that like those are the questions that we all have that are isolating at times, like you have these questions. And that's one thing that you've taught me about like creative community and having people that you can call on to uh, to talk through things together with. So I guess just like starting out, um, tell everybody a little bit about like how you started in photography, like specifically like how your grandfather impacted your journey.
Yeah. So for me, photography was something that started when I was pretty young. I was probably around the age of 10 when my grandfather loaned me a little point and shoot camera and went on a road trip together. He was living in Winston-Salem, North Carolina at the time, and my grandmother was dying of Alzheimer's disease. Um, and so it was kind of, she was in her final stages and he had to take a step away and he decided to go on a trip with me so that um, I don't remember a whole lot of that time together, but I do remember the act of making a photograph of a rotten fence post in this empty, kind of overgrown field in Cades Cove, Tennessee. And, you know, weeks later, the pictures came back from Walmart, and there was just something that happened when I saw that particular image that it was like, felt like I was sucked through a portal, and suddenly I was standing there in front of that spot again. I felt the way that I felt when I made the picture, and that was kind of the first clue that I had that photography was capable of some form of magic. And I didn't come from an artistic family. My grandfather wasn't trying to turn me into an artist. I don't think he ever really understood um, what he kind of like opened up for me. Um, but yeah, that's sort of where it started. And I grew up in a pretty rural part of Virginia, um, and I wasn't a very social kid, I guess. So, preferred photographing flowers and birds and things to human beings for the most part. So I spent the first few years of my interest with photography kind of geeking out on gear, and how I could photograph birds and frogs and things in a more colorful and poppy way. That was like kind of my aspirational bar at that point. And I don't know, but I was hungry to learn and grow, and my parents encouraged that despite not really knowing what I was up to. My dad kind of pushed me to write an article about how to photograph your garden, and it got published in Birds and Blooms magazine when I was
Oh, nice.
like 12 or 13 years old or something. And I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. Like I got paid money for some pictures that I made, and to jot down some thoughts. Like, what's that all about? And so I did that for a few years, mostly nature, um, and got into high school and was feeling more drawn towards music at that point. And so photography kind of took a backseat for a few years and played in some really um, angsty bands during the high school years, and that helped vent some of the teenage energy that I had and gave me more of a social outlet and probably a little more interest in human beings than I previously had when I was kind of living out in the sticks. And then at the end of high school, I had gotten my dream job at the Ritz camera store in the local mall, you know, slinging cameras and processing film. And I took a lunch break and went down to the bookstore, you know, kind of near my shop in the mall, and opened up an American Photo magazine that had a spread of Jim Noctway's work in there from Iraq. And it was like this revelation point for me. And that was probably my first exposure to photojournalism, I suppose. Though I kind of dropped in on this thing called the Truth of the Camera workshop when I was 14. And so I got some exposure to that then. And I think that was a turning point for me kind of around age 17, when I felt like I had to decide between music and photography. And I chose photography because it seemed like it was capable, you know, in my kind of naive state of just having, you know, just having discovered Jim Noctway's work. I was thinking like, oh, photography is this, you know, incredibly important tool for social change and justice, and it's gonna like change the world. Of course, why not? Yeah, like I would do that thing. But as we've come to discover, it's not as simple as all
Yeah, it's not as simple. Knockway has that, man, he has that effect, right? Like, I remember seeing the war photographer documentary, and I was like, what is this?
that.
What can I do with this? Yeah, I wonder how many people have that, that catalyst with that guy. Well, it's funny that you bring up the music thing because, like, we've shot together a little bit, and I've watched you shoot, like physically shoot. And so I've been thinking about, like, I wonder if there's a connection between, because you were drumming, like, in thrash metal bands, right? I mean,
That
that
was
was the
the
main
last
thing.
kind of jumping off point musically for me.
Uh,
But like I started playing piano when I was a kid, and then there was the guitar period, and I was screaming in a spaz jazz metal band for a while, and then the final step was drumming for another kind of spaz jazz thrash band, and then off to college from there, and the music kind of petered out.
so my question is, I don't know if you ever thought about this, like, because out of every photographer that I know personally, like, you're the most intensive shooter. Like, you shoot more than any person. Like, I know that it's not quite as intense as it used to be, but like the physical act of making pictures, like actually the physical part of like being in the world and making pictures, is there, what attracts you to that experience? Is there some connection with the dance of music, or it always seems like you're in this dance whenever you're making pictures? Like, talk about that physical experience of making pictures for you.
Well, if we're confessing things, I'm not much of a dancer, and my wife
Me
would
either, man.
back me up on that. Um, but yeah, I guess I've always, I don't know, music's always gotten to me in this kind of special way, and there are correlations. Um, I think just in the way that I feel about the act of creating something, right? Like the lovely thing about making music was creating sounds that I hadn't heard before, combinations of sounds that I hadn't heard before, um, but doing that in tandem with other people to make something more than I could make on my own, right? And photography is largely a kind of solitary thing, especially when, like in the early days when I was photographing birds and flowers. It's a lot more collaborative now when I'm meeting somebody and trying to kind of like build rapport and understand where they're coming from and share some common experience. Um, so there is that dance that I find to be really fascinating, but it's photography for me is largely about the practice of looking and trying to find beauty in these kind of everyday mundane things that are easily overlooked, and especially right now when um, but there's this constant friction for me where, there's still the kind of younger idealistic side of me that it's like, oh, you should be out doing something really important with your art right now. What are you doing with your life? If you're not out photographing something that puts your life in jeopardy, then maybe you're not actually doing anything worthwhile. Um, and then there's the perhaps more mature part of my brain that's like, that's just not where I am in life. That's not what I'm actually supposed to do. That's still some sort of like propaganda that I've had a hard time letting go of, that was instilled, through kind of mass media and my photojournalistic training and upbringing. But where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing is being right here with my family and looking after them and celebrating these little moments that um, often kind of just pass by. Um, so that's what the last month or so has been about in particular. And I mean, when we were in school together, I was making work about my family. These pictures feel very different than what I was making at that time. Still don't know where it's leading or what it's doing, but
Yeah, we'll talk a little. Let's riff on that a little bit. I mean, it's, of course, I'm fairly familiar with that side of your world and life, both inside and outside, in a little way. How is that? How's that shifting for you? Like photographing your family, and your. I mean, I feel like your family's always been involved in your work, like for a lot. I mean, even if it's like photographs of your granddad, or like obviously, like it. I feel like there's always been that thread, but it's just really opened up in the last what, like 5 or 6, 7, 8 years or so. Um, like specifically your girls, how are your daughters? How are they impacting, you know, the work that you're making? How you're seeing the world right now?
it's funny because I've always photographed the whole family kind of democratically, right? Like whoever's um, around and willing, in whatever activities happening. Um, but obviously, like as we all mature and grow, things change, and like their kind of receptiveness sometimes ebbs and flows. And so for example, my oldest child is now 12, so she's preteening pretty hard while in social isolation, and unable to kick it with her friends on spring break and experiencing all of that. And she still tolerates it, but she is a lot less kind of like open to being photographed, as opposed to say my younger daughter, who's generally just a more kind of outgoing person. So right now I'm working on a little piece for The Guardian where they wanted to kind of pair some of my photographs with an interview with one of my children. So I asked the older one, and she's like, hard pass. Not remotely interested in that. And my younger daughter was like, yeah, sure, let's do this. Because she's 7 and still just kind of like full of enthusiasm about everything. Um, so I've been really enjoying this moment at home with them to see my older daughter kind of maturing, but she usually would have been kind of like removed from us a bit more, hanging out with friends, school schedule, all of that stuff. Um, and I think she was kind of depressed for the first couple of weeks of this. Like she just slept a lot and also grew probably 2 or 3 inches, you know. Um, and the younger one really misses those social outlets as well. So it's been this kind of constricting of freedoms over the course of the month or so that we've been in social isolation. But started as like, yeah, you can go see your friends, and then you can't go in your friend's house, and your friends can't come over here. And okay, now like stay 6 feet away from one another when you're at the
Way
park
from across the
together.
street.
Yeah, right. Or like they like to go to the woods nearby where we live, and you know kids kind of run feral down there. It's healthy for them, but at the same time, we feel like we got to moderate and like, yo, yo, not everybody needs to touch the same the same thing there, or you guys are getting a little too close to one another. Stay off the gym equipment at the park. It's just things that really expected you to have to say. So it's hard to figure out how to render that experience photographically. Um, but yeah, just kind of documenting what I can in the moment. So right before this call, I was uploading the last 2 days worth of pictures, seeing if there's anything in there.
What's it's funny that you've been in this transition from freelance editorial photographer to now teaching full time. So I'm interested in a couple of conversations there, but I kind of let's go to the freelance editorial photographer life. You've got a little distance from it right now, a little
Little,
distance, not a
little.
lot. Um, I think people are really interested in hearing about rejection. Like, I know how much work you do outside of just the actual work, and how diligent you are. But like, talk about that. Talk about how do you deal with, you know, rejection from editorial clients, whether it's not getting a job or, you know, how that looks a lot of different ways. How do you deal with that for your own self?
Okay, well, to provide a little bit of context, editorial was sort of the ground floor for me when I started photography. The Virginian Pilot was the local newspaper near where I grew up, and it's a fantastic community-driven storytelling newspaper, and was one of the kind of greatest teachers that I've had over the years. Was just going to my family's newspaper basket and opening it up and seeing this like really intimate um, photojournalism kind of in a community context. So that was honestly kind of one of the most inspiring things for me. And while being exposed to work like Noctways, in high school, kind of propelled me towards that path. I think after quickly realizing that wasn't me, that wasn't who I was supposed to be, what I was going to be doing, kind of went back to my roots and that love of community storytelling and photojournalism. So I first started freelancing for the Virginian Pilot in 2005 when I was, I guess, like a sophomore in college, and then interned for a couple newspapers and started freelancing when I was in California doing a newspaper internship. Um, and I guess the first magazine that I worked for was The Fader, and that was way back in the day when Phil Bicker was still the creative director there, and he was kind of finding photographers, in these early days of, showing our work online. This was like pre-Tumblr, I'd say like 2006. And I'd been making work in Ohio and put some of that stuff up on this student-run website through the university that I was part of. Um, I think that's how Phil found my work, and he started tossing some kind of music-related assignments to me, which was a lot of fun because then it kind of tied back to my interest in music, brought it together with photography. I was getting to meet these cool musicians and go to interesting places, um, and that kind of hooked me. But I think I worked for him for maybe a year and a half, and then he kind of moved on to other photographers. And so that was still in the days, I guess that was right around the time that my oldest daughter was born. And so I was relying on this freelance work for sustenance at that point because we were still in college, had a kid, and I was trying to do work for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and Fader and places like that where the average rate was 200 to $400 a day, something like that. Um, so it required a good bit of hustle to make any money from that. Um, and when I stopped getting work from the Fader, it helped me realize, oh, like there's not necessarily anything that they owe you. There isn't necessarily this kind of ongoing professional relationship. An editor can pivot to a different style, different photographer at any point in time. And you can't expect any amount of income to come from kind of one revenue stream, right? So that was an early signal that I needed to diversify and to think outside of just these kind of limited photojournalistic models that I've been presented with. I was still applying to staff positions at newspapers, and I applied for a staff job at the Virginian Pilot in 2009, shortly after we relocated from Ohio back to Virginia. Um, And I was really gunning for that job, but instead they didn't hire me. They hired several of these photographers that became some of my kind of best friends and mentors over the years, including Amanda Lucier, Ross Taylor, and Preston Ganaway. And so living in Norfolk, suddenly I was surrounded by this amazing community of photographers that had come there for this newspaper. And that was kind of an education in and of itself. After I finished undergrad, I was trying to kind of start anew and build a business in this place that isn't really very artistically friendly. It's kind of landlocked by all of the water around, and it's not an easy place to make a living as an artist or a photographer. Um, and so at this point, I've been a freelancer for 15 years, but in, I guess, 2017, I started adjunct teaching and then began a full-time position late last year. So just wrapping up my first year of full-time teaching. So that's given me a little chance to kind of separate how I'm making money from the pictures that I'm making because they've always been so intertwined. It's been hard to say, like, this is just for me versus this is for my client. I'm always looking for something for my own work and for my own artistic kind of inclinations when I'm working for a client, but I'm also, I felt like this pressure as a person who's trying to make ends meet just through freelance work to take my personal work and then kind of present it or shape it in a way that could be palatable to a editorial client or a commercial client in the hopes of getting more work. And now I don't feel that pressure. So there's a certain amount of freedom in that that I'm trying to learn to appreciate and enjoy. Um, but to circle back to the rejection component, so I mean, it's always there. It's always been there. It's like the air we breathe as creative beings, but especially as photographers. Yeah, so you're pitching, and sometimes those are getting rejected. Sometimes they're getting accepted. Uh, trying to work for editorial clients, commercial clients, applying for grants, competitions, exhibitions. Uh, yeah, and I don't know, rejection kind of runs the gamut through all of those things. And then also just in the day to day, when you walk out the door with your camera and you see something amazing and you approach and ask and you put your foot in your mouth and, you get rejected. And that's just what happens to us. Or at least, at least
Yeah,
some of
I think it's
us.
universal. Yes, it's universal.
Yeah. So that's, I don't know, one of the things that I really try and drive home to students is just become comfortable with that and realize that it's not a reflection of your self-worth. Like that's the hard part for us to separate from, I think, a lot of times is we place so much value on who acknowledges our work or where it gets published or where it gets exhibited and how it's you know awarded or not or whatever. But really that's no proper value judgment on the work, and we have to have some separation between kind of our self value and the value that other people put on our work.
So, I looking at your work over a long stretch of time, and I'm really interested to see your new work too. The further you get away from kind of like angling or thinking about the angle of your work and how it can serve you in a like an editorial sense, even your especially your personal work. I think like a really common thread in you know all of your work is there's this like resounding anxiety, like such a tremendous resounding anxiety in the work. um you know where does that for you, where does that anxiety come from? Because obviously it's your subconscious screaming, coming out, but like where do you find that comes from?
Yeah, I see that my younger sister is listening in on this and laughing out loud at this moment.
I
Yep,
wondered who that was.
yep, it's my sister. So yeah, she and I've had some conversations about this very thing. I think I had a lot of anxiety as a child and didn't have a name for it or a way to kind of articulate it, and so it just kind of went unspoken about, and I buried it basically. Um, I was a kind of hyperactive kid for a long time, and then like I, my mom tells me that I got really sick when I was, I don't know, like 8 or 9 for a few weeks, was just kind of laid out, and then after that I was just a bit more mellow as a human being. But the I think the internal anxiety has stayed at that kind of high rev, ever since, even though I'm externally a little bit calmer, perhaps. And I don't really know what the root of it is. I guess that's probably years of therapy away from being able to articulate. But just in recent memory, like anxiety, certainly as a freelance only person, was largely economic based, right? Like, how are we going to make ends meet, especially through 3-month periods of drought, which were not uncommon. Um, and more recently, it's been anxiety about the juggle with commuting to and from this job and trying to teach and be present there and also present for my family and able to maintain personal practice and still take on some assignments when they're of interest and fit into things. But more esoterically, like there's the anxiety that all parents have about, like, am I doing this right? Are my kids going to be okay? Am I providing for them? Am I totally screwing this up? Um, what world are they coming into? Right? Like my oldest was born in 2007, so that was kind of right as the recession was kicking off, and so that was a source of anxiety for a number of years. And then, you know, there are periods where things seem to be going all right, but even leading up to our present moment, it seemed like every week or two there's a mass shooting in our country, and the opioid epidemic is, just wreaking havoc among rural America and urban areas too. But all of these different crises that are unfolding before us, and if we're paying attention at all and have any sense of empathy, it will give anybody deep, deep anxiety. Um, and so I think it's this confluence of concern for my children and their future, but my country at large and my fellow Americans, the things that we're all kind of experiencing and going through at this present moment. It's enough to break anybody's heart if you're actually kind of looking out with a sense of empathy, trying to consider what people are going through. So I, for one, feel lucky as shit to have a job in this moment and have a space that I can work in and be around the people that I love, because that's not the case for a lot of people.
What are some ways that you found to, I mean, I would like to say calm your anxiety? Are there things that, personal practices that you do outside of photography that help?
I mean, I wish I had healthier answers, but like bourbon and weed are pretty helpful sometimes. All joking aside, pictures, like that's why I photograph all the time, because I can assuage some of that anxiety by making photographs. And I don't know exactly where that wiring came from in my head. You know, some days it doesn't really help at all, but some days it does have this calming effect. It slows me down. It allows me to appreciate just the beauty of the way that light rests on certain objects, or the kind of transcendent quality of whatever kind of daily occurrence happens to be unfolding in front of me. Um, so that music, playing music, having a piano upstairs has been the best thing for my mental health over the last year or so. I don't know how to read music. I just make noise, and I try not to um, trip myself up with it. And same for some kind of other artistic experiments that I've been doing. So like there's the picture making, but I'm realizing the longer I do this, that there's more value, at least for me, in kind of reaching out for other forms of influence: poetry, painting, music. It's all starting to kind of mix together, and I find that that's been really helpful to have more than one way of expressing some of this concern, because photographs can only do so much, right? They're silent, and I can't go out into the world to make the pictures that I might want to make at this present moment. So I've got to work within the limitations presented, find ways to make it work.
Yeah, talk about painting. I know you've been painting for a little while. What's that experience been like for you?
I mean, it waxes and wanes. So it kind of started when I was doing this collaboration with a poet 2 years ago now. And we were just rolling around West Virginia together. I was making pictures, he was writing poems, and it was something about this kind of um, immersive, collaborative experience where we were just talking, listening to music, kind of, we're rolling around these roads, and he's reciting poems and songs to me. It helped break through these blockages that were left over from some of my early training. And I came back and bought some canvases and just started slapping paint on them. Some of them look kind of cool to me, but I don't know anything about painting. I'm breaking all the rules, I'm sure, and I'm doing lots of silly cliche things, and that's okay. I'm trying to be naive. Um, and so after a little while of that, started slapping paint onto pictures and still just playing around. So behind me now, there's a couple things on the wall that are, from just like the last day or so of experimentations, and I don't feel like anything's finished, and I'm okay with that. So right now I'm still photographing like I normally would, and looking for other outlets to express myself within the confines of my home.
Yeah, it's funny you use the word naive. Like, and I struggle with this too because I feel like there's always this like strange, like there's these two entities that are always present. There's like the one that sees the reality of things and sees how it's going to play out, which I think is like part of being a documentary photographer, is like you are in tune with where the ball's rolling, like, or it's almost like a prophetic thing of like, I know this is going to get worse and that's why I'm where I, but then there's also this other person in the room that is almost purely naive, that is hopeful is maybe a strange word to use. You said earlier how like you hope that your pictures would change, in some ways change the world. But I think there's something. I mean, I think there's something there. Like, how do you deal with like embracing, trying to sustain a certain amount of naivete? Um,
I don't know, man. That's been an ongoing struggle. But what you're talking about is, I mean, something I've been literally writing about in recent applications, which have all been failures, FYI. But that idea of feeling this overwhelming sense of um, kind of dread, existential dread for the country at large, and needing to balance that with a sense of hopefulness or optimism for the future. Because otherwise, if we just despair and throw up our hands, like, nothing's going to get any better. It's just going to get drastically worse. And I don't know, we don't have any excuse to leave the world the way we found it. Like,
yeah. How do you?
it's on us to push forward, hopefully to leave things better for the next generation. And as we can see now, like, that's not looking good.
It's funny. Like I think about that a lot. Like leaving. What am I leaving behind? Like what's my lineage gonna be? Like do you think about that often? I mean, I know like having kids, it's almost inevitable. But with your work, how do you think about like the lineage you're leaving behind?
I don't know. I mean, so I'm making things like photography is still, it can be a really intangible thing, especially in the age of the internet where, we're posting on social media or on our websites, and that stuff can go away, right? It doesn't last. Exhibitions don't last. Editorial publications don't last. Books, you know, they might outlast us. So that's kind of a form that I've been drawn to, books and zines, because books can seem a little um, too precious sometimes. And I think zines can fill the gap, and still be a physical object that you can use as a kind of way of reaching out to another human being, putting something in their hands, even if you can't physically be there with them. And so I think that form is most compelling to me. and I try and spread them around so that they're hopefully not just on the shelves of other photographers, right? Which, no problem with that, but you do want to reach other people hopefully, and try and kind of tip beyond your echo chamber, I think, in making work and distributing the work. But mostly when I'm making this stuff, honestly, like it always does go back to family, and it goes back to my kids. So I am thinking about, like, what are the kind of visual messages that I'm leaving behind for them, and it's usually love notes, but also kind of within this dark framework of our world.
Beware.
Yeah,
Beware.
some cautionary tales, but also, hopeful notes. And um, I'm not sure how clearly I can articulate all of that with photographs, and so writing is probably going to be an important component of it. Like, I recently started writing a note to my daughters, and it's not finished yet, but it was one of those notes that I would hope that they would have access to if I'm not here with them anymore. Um, yeah.
I think I like reflect on I don't know, certain spaces that I see recur in some of your pictures, and uh, especially with that, just like leaving behind a certain lineage. And I'm probably gonna like swerve real quick, but where's you guys go on a regular vacation, right? Like to the beach or to an island or something? Is that right?
Yeah, there's a little place off the Outer Banks called
Yeah,
Ocracoke Island that we went to for years when I was a kid, and then we didn't go for a long time, and then we started going with our kids, and yeah, we were hoping to do that this summer, but
yeah.
that's not happening.
But I mean, but at least in regards to that, like what's special about that place for you? Like what's special about that experience for you?
Well, uh, it's changed over the years, but it used to be that, like, there was no internet or cell service on the island. So there was a certain, like, you get on the ferry boat, and there was a kind of stark delineation between you're on the mainland and now you're on the island in terms of accessibility and isolation, and um, just the feeling that you were there with the people that mattered the most, right? And that you'd left everything else behind. And that is kind of how it feels right now. This is like our own little desert island moment, I think, in a way.
I mean, for you, is that important to have kind of an annual uh shut the lights off and go get out of get out of town?
But even in that context, I've always struggled to separate from the work, because I am definitely a workaholic, and I think that's another kind of manifestation of my anxiety. I'm like, I can't fix anything else, but I can try and do this. So, you know, even there in that peaceful place, surrounded by the people that I love, at least in years past, I've always found it takes me several days to kind of like uncouple my brain from that train. Um, and so I'm hoping that once this teaching semester is done and grades are filed and that's behind me, that will be that period of time of kind of shut down, reboot, try and look at things through a fresh perspective and see where I should be moving towards next. Because my plan initially was to be traveling around the country thinking like, oh boy, we're going to have an election year and there's like impeachment proceedings happening. That's going to be interesting. And oh, let's throw in, a pandemic on top of that now. So there's never been a crazier time in my lifespan to be a photographer and to be out making photographs in the world. But of course, now we are also trying to figure out how to be as safe about that as possible, to not endanger others or ourselves, right? So yeah, I'm not sure what the summer is going to look like, but it's probably not going to be me road tripping around America doing guerrilla style exhibitions and mass distributing newsprints and, finishing up this like 15-year book project as I had planned to do.
The best laid plans, right?
Right. Yeah.
So what are you hearing from your friends and people that are, photojournalists and photographers out in the field right now? Are you keeping up with people that are working in the middle of this?
Yeah. I mean, it's dark. Most of my friends have lost tens of thousands of dollars of work and, expected revenue, and a lot of them don't have health insurance or benefits, and so if they get really sick, then that's a real problem for them. And I've talked to a few photographers that have been kind of out documenting things for major news outlets, and the steps that they take to trying to protect themselves and others. At least one colleague was pretty sure that he had it. Seems to be recovering, but by and large, most of my friends have kind of stopped accepting assignments unless they meet a certain kind of risk threshold. There's no reason to put yourself in jeopardy, or your loved ones in jeopardy, or any community members in jeopardy, if that's even a possibility.
Well, there's kind of like a final little place that I like to explore when with like these types like conversations, especially reflecting upon the shift, like where you're not the person like you have your career has shifted, to teaching, even if that's at least for me, that was like not on the radar, is to be teaching, and then it started happening and it was great. But I don't know, sometimes I do think about like, if I never got into this photo thing, like what would I be doing and who would I be? Like,
Mm.
do you ever think about that?
Yeah, I mean, every now and then, again, I let my mind wander, and fantasize about like what would life be like if I was a poet or a musician. And I realize that the music industry is probably, if there is a bleaker landscape than photography, it's music. Um, and poetry's right up there too. So clearly, like, I just have really poor professional choices that I make. But yeah, it would always. It's so funny. If I could do it differently, I don't think I would. I think I would probably be doing something that's equally difficult. Some other sort of artistic realm. Um, and so that realization makes me kind of more driven to examine the confluence of these different things and figure out how I can channel those interests, or yeah,
Yeah,
work
it's
within
been,
those.
man, it's been such a relief for me to realize that like many years I would not want to ever say it, but now I could totally say that photography is a means to an end. It's a means to like to try to uncover something, to pull the like the pull the cover back on something, and like it's not just about photography. Like we are photographers, but like that's not just, that's just the means in which we're working through things, but that's not the only. So like being able to write and paint and make little films and all that, it's such a like, I don't know, for me it was like an awakening or something. I'm like, oh, I'm not limited by this means. And I may not be any good at any of those other things, but there's something about like a whole new landscape opens up, and it's kind of funny that we're like mid 30s, like, oh, we could write poetry, we could do these things.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't be telling ourselves those things actually, but um, I don't. Yeah, there was something, and I've had conversations with colleagues recently about how as we're kind of leaving the home and like going to college and seeking some sense of purpose and identity, that we often attach ourselves as quickly as possible to whatever kind of title we can, right? Like, I'm a photojournalist, I'm a ceramicist, I am a painter, right? But like, we're all human beings, and we're artists, and we're creative creatures, and we need to expand our mindsets and the ability to kind of soak in all of these different things for creative sustenance, for influence and inspiration. But at least personally, like, I shut myself off from a lot of that for many years to my own detriment. And so that's something that I'm really trying to instill in students, is just open your mind, allow these other things into your life and into your kind of like perceptions of things, and see where that leads you.
Yeah, it's such a relief to like not be beholden to like I'm a photojournalist. and or like that structure of what we at one point in our lives considered what photojournalism was, of like it's this, you know, it has to be this thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like really interested too. And we've had, golly, how many conversations about what is photojournalism anymore and where is it going? And we just started I kind of have like a major emphasis in photojournalism now in my little tiny school. And so for a while I was like, should I just jettison photojournalism as a term, like just not anymore? But I don't know, part of me is like, maybe I kind of just want to reclaim that and like, what can it be? And what, you know, what are the different forms of it? Because photographs are just limited ways to tell, like they're limited narrative tools,
Hmm.
uh, and it's much more interesting to use them and unpack the photographs, you know. And I mean, I think photographs are better at asking questions than they are to tell and giving answers, you know. So I don't know.
At least the
I'm
interesting ones.
yeah, the good ones are. Um,
No,
like
but your point is on point, which is, you know, the term photojournalism came out however many decades ago, right? And society was in a different place then, with different modes of distribution and also different needs, right? And a different economic framework as well. But now that framework has crumbled. Society still needs truth, and you know, however it's defined, I guess. They need stories. They need opportunities for empathy and human connection. So that part hasn't changed, but photojournalism hasn't necessarily done a good job of keeping up with the evolution of society and what society's needs are, in my opinion. And I think that's the future of it, really. You know, if we're going to reclaim that title, it needs to be kind of recontextualized a little bit for the modern age so that it's communicating in innovative ways across technology, but also just thinking outside of the kind of limited box that photojournalism has come to represent.
yeah, definitely. Well, um, I didn't have a whole lot of many more things to ask and talk about with you. You kind of hit some of the things that, you know, I mostly wanted to talk about, you know, this transition in life for sure for you and theoretically, you know, people that are tuning in know your work. So it's like we don't even have to talk about work. Let's just talk about like life. And I think it's a good relief for people to realize. Like I had a question from someone posted a question for me to ask, like, you know, I'm 16. What should I do if I want to be a photojournalist? And it's like, get used to rejection.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you need to make a lot of work and you need to make good work, but you need to be accustomed to like a lot of failure and you know, like you do it because you love it. And it's not a, you know, like it's not a happy marriage at all, you know, like, but it's like you do it
but
because you love
man,
it.
like on a good day, nothing beats it, though, that's for sure.
Oh man, yeah. When you hit it, like when you like, I think that's a good place. That's actually a good place to like to land the plane. We've been in the negative a lot, but like, when was the last time, and what was, if you can recall, like what was it? You know, what was the last time that you had a like satisfaction in your work? Like you made something that you've thought like, I feel that, you know, was satisfying in some way. Do you remember when that moment was?
So earlier this year, I got to work on a piece for the Atlantic where they actually gave us some time and resources to try and do it right. The online version just went up yesterday for that. And, you know, the edit was okay, but there were a lot of pictures that I made that weren't published that I liked more. So there was a few moments in that job where I was like, okay, cool. It feels nice to be out making money and making pictures at the same time. What a world.
Imagine that.
But yeah, more recently, it's just I'm trying to surprise myself within the limitations of these strange days, right? And so, you know, I've been just photographing around home, around family, around the kids, and I just uploaded a picture from when we went down to the park, and the kids had popsicles, and one of them left a kind of like red stained popsicle stick on the wrapper on the end of the bench, and it's dusk. The bench is this like dark wood, and the grass is kind of falling off because the light's fading. Um, and one of my daughters is jumping off the bench, so you just see her feet, and then the other kid is standing a few feet behind the bench, running in the opposite direction, and you just see her feet. And it was one of those that was kind of an accidental photograph, but and I don't know if it's gonna rise through the whatever to make it into any edits at any point, but it did a little something for me, like caught me a little bit by surprise, and reminding me why I continue looking, and that I don't know what I'm looking for, and that's the fun of it and the joy of it. Yeah. I don't know if we should try and address any questions that have rolled through on here. I don't really know how to do this thing.
Let's
So I'm
see.
kind of learning
There's a
as we
thing
go.
with a question mark of questions over the past 30 minutes. Oh goodness. There are a few questions on here. Uh, oh goodness. Let's see. Here's one from Jared Necht from 30 minutes ago. How did you find your voice?
Oof.
That's a big one. I don't know
Um,
if I can get this to go down now. Ugh. I have you in a harmonica holder. That's my iPhone stand.
I wondered what your professional move was, because I have no such technology. I'm
It's
just holding
literally
it,
a
which is why I
harmonica
keep
holder.
shaking, guys. Sorry. It's chilly down here. Okay, so Jared, next question: how to find your voice?
How did you find your voice?
I mean, I'm still looking for it, right? Like that's the pursuit, or part of the pursuit at least, is um, looking for ways to visually articulate yourself and these things that don't have words that we're trying to express. And um, Sasha Wolf's book, like where she presented 40 different photographers with the same set of questions, kind of addresses this. I think that's kind of one of the questions, is like, do you think you have a photographic voice? If so, how do you find it? You know, that sort of thing. And there's some amazing answers in there that are going to be way more articulate than anything that I would offer. Um, but the idea of just kind of practicing and pounding again and again and again and again, you know, and then eventually somebody says, hey, you do this thing a lot. And you're like, oh yeah, I guess I do. Whether it's like, you make black and white pictures a lot, or your pictures are always kind of tilted this way, or
They're always sad. That's what my
right.
students say. It's like, your pictures are always sad. Like, you don't know nothing.
Yeah, I mean, so I realized that I'm always kind of drawn to a mixture of beauty and sadness, right? Like I
Yeah.
find sadness in beauty, and I find beauty in sadness, and I don't know why, but that's just sort of, that's what I look for in the music and the poetry and the photographs and the paintings. Like, and I'm looking for emotional resonance. But I also go through phases where my kind of photographic voice will evolve or change, and sometimes that's kind of to meet the needs of the project, or to express different things that I can't express with my current photographic language. So experiments with different mediums, for me, seem to stem from that sort of frustration with the limitations of photography. I run up against a wall with it, and I can either sit down and call it quits, or I can try and find a way over, around, under, whatever that barrier is. I don't know if that addresses the question or not. Why don't you feel free to cherry pick a couple others out of there.
I got an ethics question. I don't want to talk about ethics. Jiminy Christmas. Uh, uh, oh, from the same guy. This is probably a good one to end on. I'm not going to use all the question, but he says, "What's the worst advice you've ever gotten as a photographer?"
Oh, oh, I'd have to dig deep. Um, Worst advice: shoot JPEG. Just sign that contract. Don't read it. I don't know. Like, I've gotten lots of bad advice. I've probably given lots of bad advice. Yeah.
Don't keep your copyright when you
Right.
shoot a job.
Yeah. I mean, but if I'm thinking about what was said to me early on that actually did make a difference. I remember going to this photojournalism conference when I was 18. I like rode along with some of my classmates, and I went and I brought a portfolio. I'm pretty sure that was like slides and a slide page, old school style, and showed it to some professionals and was kind of like widely rejected. And remember felt feeling this like crushing sense of like I'm not cut out for this. And I ended up showing it to one other person, um, and he was like, "You're fine, man. Just keep on going. Just keep on going." And that little bit of encouragement amongst all the rejection was enough to kind of propel me forward to like whatever the next step was, the next mistake I made that led me to some halfway decent picture. And you learn from those mistakes, and you learn from the pictures that you don't understand over time. Yeah, Peter McCullough dropping some words of wisdom. Should have listened to him. Yeah.
I remember going to a conference as well, and a particular person that was really important that time looking at my portfolio and saying, "You should probably do something else." Yeah, it's funny how, yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? The best advice is just keep going. Like, that is the best advice. You just got to keep going. And at some point, you're going to be so far down the road that you can't turn around. And you
Yep.
have to keep doing it.
Yep. And I've felt that at certain points where I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to be here anymore, but I got nowhere else to be. And then you just kind of put your head down and muscle through it, and then you come out on the other side of it usually.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it. Matt, I love you. Thank you for your time. Thanks for sharing with folks. I'm trying to do these for, I guess I'm just going to do one once a week and see what happens, see how many that happen.
Yeah.
And, hopefully try to help folks out that are stuck and, stuck at home and need some encouragement or need some reality checks or need to hear another photographer say that, yeah, it's tough and we don't have it figured out and we're doing the best we can, like we're all doing it. So don't feel lonely. We're doing it.
Yes, we are. Well, love you back, brother, and thanks for making this happen. I think this is a good reminder that we're here for one another, right? Like as a community. So it's cool seeing people's comments and things pop in here, but that's the only reason that I've made it as long as I have, because I've got people like you around me supporting and checking in and making sure that we're all plugging along, right? So I would just encourage everybody to reach out to one another and look out for one another, and we can get through this, and hopefully we'll come out smarter, stronger, more creative human beings on the other side of it.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. Have a good Friday. Say hi to your family for me.
All right, man. Same to you.
See you, brother.
Peace.